William Kloss is an independent art historian educated at Oberlin College and the University of Michigan, a Fulbright scholar in Rome for 2 years, and a former professor of art history at the University of Virginia. He has lectured for the Smithsonian Institution for more than 30 years in over 100 seminars and more than 35 tours abroad. In 1985, the Smithsonian published his Treasures from the National Museum of American Art, and in 1988, his book, Samuel F. B. Morse, was published by Henry and Abrams in association with the museum. Bill was a member of the Committee for the Preservation of the White House for 20 years, and the second revised edition of his book, Art in the White House, A Nation's Pride, was declared winner in the art category of the 2009 National Indie Excellence Award. He was also principal contributor to Treasures of State, Fine and Decorative Arts in the Diplomatic Reception Rooms of the U.S. Department of State, and co-author with Senate Curator Diane Scavala of the United States Senate Catalog of Fine Art. The teaching company has produced 5 of his videotape courses as part of their Great Courses catalog, including History of European Art and Masterworks of American Art. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bill Kloss to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm very happy you're here. Nona seems to have given me 15 extra minutes to speak tonight, so watch out. Normally I didn't ask permission, and I'll try not to tread on your time. You got a handout. I think most of you got it as you came in, and it's emerged in an unusual fashion. When we talked about a checklist, I also mentioned that because the paintings are installed in related but different areas, one distinct gallery and then 2 related corridor sections, very intelligently but broken up a bit, they decided to lay it out like this. Now, if you have your reading glasses or your magnifier, you'll be set. I actually can give you, just to help you identify by sight, run through them, starting in the large corner gallery, E212, running from the back. That's normally the Dewing room, and it has the Steinway piano with Dewing's painted lid. Running from the window side, the north window side, you have Martin Johnson Heade in 3 paintings, 2 orchid paintings, and then a little further toward the door, the Marsh painting. Then Dennis Miller Bunker in a landscape, and a small John Singer Sargent on the adjacent wall, and a large John Singer Sargent on the center of end wall on the south wall, and then a John Lafarge, still life, roses, and then a Mary Cassatt, not just any Mary Cassatt, is hanging between the windows on the east wall. In the corridor, which is marked second floor on your second floor is printed right above it. In that corridor at the end is the St. Gaudens sculpture, which many of you are very familiar with, the memorable sculpture which he designed as a memorial for a tomb. I won't go into that now. There are in that area 2 John Sloans on the left-hand wall as you're looking at this. That would be the west wall, yes. And then on the right wall, 2 George Bellows facing them. And again on the left wall after the doorway, a large George Bellows hangs there, opposite a Lawson painting of an excursion boat. And then finally in this group in the hall, you're headed west in the north corridor. And you have 3 paintings together. They're all urban landscapes, park scenes and so forth. They're all park scenes, not so forth. George Luke's, and then a William Glackens, and then a Prendergast are there. And opposite them, on the right, is an Everett Shinn of a scene supposedly in the Winter Garden, and I'll have to raise questions about that later to New Yorkers who are here. It's a trapeze scene on stage in the Winter Garden in 1903, and then the museum's own painting by Shinn of a related scene of the year afterward called The White Ballet, and they make a very, very interesting comparison. So that gives you an idea, pardon me, of where they're laid out and how you will find them when you go upstairs to the second floor. You only have 2 months for this, and I say that with all seriousness because there are some things you'd like to spend 2 months with. Get things out of the way here. I'm going to begin with the Heeds. Now, these paintings, the 19 paintings that are here and that are not a casual choice, but nonetheless with only 19, he said, 19 paintings, how are you going to organize them? Strictly by artist? Well, to some degree that's true, I think, because we have 2 artists who have 3 paintings each in this show, 2 artists who have 2 paintings each, and the other 9 have 1 painting each. Nonetheless, all of these paintings, and they're quite different in subject matter and some cases in style, all of these paintings were produced in a 50-year period between about 1870 and 1920. And it's an astonishing variety of work, as you find in a larger museum, but I think when you are in the larger museum, but when you're focused down on this group, you realize how very much was going on in American art during that 50-year period. It's given many names, the Golden Age, etc. That's a social term. Sometimes the art reflects it, and sometimes it doesn't. And there are many styles which raise their heads, Impressionism, Ashcan school, and so forth and so on. You won't hear me say them too often. I'm going to concentrate on the works themselves, and I'm not going to give a great deal of biography because it's actually available to you on the labels, very excellent labels, I think, in the gallery. There's enough material, enough biographical material there. Martin Johnson Head, the first of whose paintings I'm showing you is on the screen, is a painter with a very long life. One of the things that made me decide that for myself I would organize it in a different way to start with, I laid everything out according to the birth date of the artist, just to see what would happen. And actually it made a great deal of logical sense visually when you saw them. It does work. But it is always surprising to look at an artist like Martin Johnson Head and realize that he was born in 1819 and he died in 1904. And this is a long life, and yet most of the work that we know by him is after the mid-60s, and it goes up to the year of his death, but it changes over time. He was a good friend of Frederick Edwin Church, although Church made such fun of him that I don't know how they remained good friends. But anyway, it was an unequal friendship, you might say. But because of Church's interest in South America, I think because of it, Martin Head decided that he would go to South America too, which he did first in the 60s and made 3 trips in a rather short period of about 6 years. Before he went to South America, he painted then and later, but particularly in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, he painted these remarkable marsh scenes. Some of them were in New Jersey. They were in various places along the northeast coast where these marshlands lay, and they are marked in most cases by these, what I think of as space markers, these wonderful hay stacks. And in this case, quite unusually, actually, he includes a hay rick here. I found only one other in a casual looking through a heat, and that was one falling down in the background of a picture. But this is the kind of main anchor of the picture, a picture which in a way needs an anchor because Heed is so fascinated with the atmosphere, which he's mastered, I think. It's extraordinary. These paintings Heed produced, and they were sold in very elaborate frames, Gilded Age frames. I mean, you really could say that. They're parlor frames, I suppose, for the right parlor. I have cropped them down. Not that these were all in parlor frames, but I have cropped this one down because I think you can focus more on the painting, and I'm not a frame expert in any case. So I wanted to show you this. This is typical of the marsh scenes in that it's very long and low, because he wants the horizon. He wants that whole spread, and it's not a big picture, and yet it's an arm's open picture because of that. And everything lies that way, and he constructs it in wonderful parallel horizontals, the water in the foreground, the land, the sky. The water is marvelous in itself. It shows the kind of cleverness he gets up to here as a composer. He's interested as much as anything, perhaps more than anything, in the reflections in the water. But they're not just light reflections, as you see on the right here. They're also dark reflections, reflections in dark water. So that on this side of the painting, he drops everything into darkness, a kind of cloud darkness, and the plants are just highlit on their leaves by indirect light. And then you move across, and the ducks, which are more or less incidental because the light is everything. And here you end up with a situation in which a mirror-like light backs up and throws into relief the water grasses in the foreground. All that's been thought through with a great deal of care and painted with incredible subtlety, a subtlety which only increases as you move back. I do love the hayrick because it is such an extraordinary space marker. You have to walk around it visually, in a sense, and it does hold, as these do, the road back into the canvas to the horizon, which is not seen because his land, which has hills over here, just fades into the sky back here. The colors just blend at the horizon so that it's almost not there. This is a remarkable miracle of a sky, as is this hazy sun, which he shows. That was something that was much liked by a lot of artists, American artists painting at the time. They loved to put the sun in that kind of a haze. It almost intensified it as you stare at it, better than a golden orb. This is 1876, and it's called Gray Day on the Marsh, and it's 15 by 30 inches, just to get a 2-to-1 ratio of length to height. He made his last trip to South America in 1870, and he'd already begun while there to paint both orchids and hummingbirds, usually together, but these were two subjects which he called, when he started painting them, he did a group of smaller paintings which were called the gems of the tropics is all I can think of, but that's not correct. But gems in any event, and they were immensely popular in Brazil. And he was, in fact, given great honors by the emperor. I'm going to show you the two in the Lincoln collection that let me make sure I push the right button. There's the first of 1870, probably about 1870, when he made his third and last visit to South America. He also, while on that trip, he went to Colombia and to Panama and Jamaica. But then he did a new series of hummingbirds starting around 1870 when he returned, hummingbird and orchid paintings, based on sketches from past trips. And most of his subsequent career is a matter of making paintings from sketches and small paintings that he had in his studio. It's not, there is a group that are done from life, but mainly it is a matter of careful recopying, representing with different foliage and so forth around them. He does something very different here in terms of shall we say, for a moment, let's call it a still life. This white Brazilian orchid. It does have a hummingbird, which might as well be another orchid. It's beautifully placed, and I think he always has a good deal of interest in contrasting the shape of the hummingbird with the shapes of the pods of the orchid. It's a still life in a landscape, in one and in front of one. And the one it's in front of is basically at a distance. You have lead-ins in the foreground, in the left foreground, but the real landscape is the misty mountains in the distance. And he makes a great deal of the mists of the sky and of the beautiful expressiveness of the sky. This is probably, it's undated, but it's probably, I would think, closer to 1875 than later. It's given a 10-year possibilities. It's 14 by 22 inches. He's brought the orchid closer to the picture plane, and he paints it with great care and great firmness, and the landscape behind is generalized and atmospheric. The next one is another, but different. He only twice painted the yellow orchid, and it's a glorious orchid indeed. A yellow orchid with two hummingbirds perched out there and paying attention to each other. But of course, remember, this is a construction of his. I'm not quite sure how Audubon-like he was in terms of what belonged together. He was more interested in the picture. This is wonderful, I think, for the way the top bird on that end of the branch is placed against a very particularly beautiful sky with the light shining, breaking through the clouds just above that bird, and then the wonderful snowy mountain peaks beyond. It has a tremendous presence. It is a slightly larger picture, and as you see, of course, it's horizontal. Now, there is another horizontal still life in the exhibition, and one which is easy to love. It's this John Lafarge. If you know John Lafarge, you're apt to know him better as a maker of stained glass because he became so famous, stained and painted glass, for his work at Trinity Church in Boston and the great windows there. But you can also see on the second floor, just 2 steps from these, a 2-panel John Lafarge window, so you can get an idea of his own stained glass. But he taught still life as painting, and it's unusual. He taught it to a lot of people. A lot of artists learned still life painting from him. And his way of painting still life is different because it takes on the mood, or one of the moods, of the late 19th century, and that is an inwardness. And there's no question in Lafarge's case that it is a kind of solemnity that sets into his still life paintings. His flowers are not meant to make you smile and water them. It doesn't work that way. First of all, you can't water these because they've already been plucked, and he's arranged them in a very shallow bowl, which I didn't realize before is a Japanese black lacquer bowl. And he had a large collection of such shallow bowls, which he used for many of his still lifes, and he does here. The reason that I never really noticed it before is because he purposely obscures it on the left-hand side of it. The only place we see it, you see the bottom of it and part of the base is on the right-hand side where it scoops up and where you have only two flowers at that point, two blooms, then two more after a short space, and then in the center a wonderful large white blossom, and then you might say after that it's all downhill because they are fading and dying and curling up on themselves, in themselves, the petals are curling in, and they're hanging over the edge of the bowl, and they cover the edge of the bowl. That's intentional. That's not even necessarily, I have to always say, that's not even necessarily something he saw. Maybe he waited around, or maybe he moved wilting flowers to that side. You know, this is because it so consistently in his work gives off an aura of melancholy. Melancholy is too strong, even just of a kind of weariness. They're beautiful, but the beauty is fading. The background is glorious, I think. It's a curtain, I suppose, with light coming through, a translucent a curtain in the background. You'll see something similar in paintings by Degas, who loved that kind of a light source. Here, because we're up so close to this table, and by the way, at eye level, high table, sitting, what gets us this? I suppose you're sitting because he was with his easel, but it's right there, and it's on what we see as, we read less as a table than a narrow, dark ledge, and then behind it these great slats, and I'm thinking of painted slats of paint, which he lays in, these verticals, and then one area where crossing that, do you perceive that here he's laid horizontals moving across here, or you can see the strokes, which counter the general verticality of these areas here. These paintings are, they may take a little time to look at, I don't know, but what you have, I think you are probably stuck with them because he's very habit forming. He's also a very fine painter in many other ways, landscape paintings, especially toward the end of his life, which are particularly wonderful. He's a remarkable artist and person. Roses in a Shallow Bowl, 1879. And they're life-size. This is not reduced. Some still lifes do reduce their subjects, but this is all at life-size. I think everybody knows the name Thomas Moran. You better, if you don't go upstairs and meet him. But the Moran's upstairs, three great, huge, important canvases. The first of them, the earliest of them, of Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, is particularly interesting in the context of this painting. This is a Moran watercolor. It is, Moran, by the way, was born in 1837, Farge in 1835, just to keep you up to date on these people. Moran was English by birth and came to America having already studied painting, studied more while he was here, and then had the opportunity in 1871 to go to the West. It was presented to him by the railroad, which needed records, and they wanted an artist as well as a photographer. The photographer, Jackson, was already well known and became particularly so, and they worked side by side, he and Lafarge, literally sometimes sitting side by side, photographing and painting a sketch of the same image, the same site. This one is called, and it's a finished watercolor. This is not sketchy. He's given this enormous care. It's the largest of the watercolors that he produced at that time of this site and related sites during the trip to the hot springs of Gardiner's River in Yellowstone National Park at Wyoming. This site that you see here, which looks almost like a lunar setting, is about 1,000 feet above the river. And they had to walk up, climb up that 1,000 feet, a mile or something high, and reach this. And when Thomas Hayden, Ferdinand Hayden, pardon me, give him the right name, the geologist who was leading the group, said, and when it burst into view, when suddenly at once we saw this, we were all completely astonished. We had never seen anything like it, nor had anyone else seen anything like it. So they stayed not long, 3 days, I think Moran says, but he painted some 24 large watercolors, this being the largest and the most finished of them. It is dated 1872. He finished it in 72. And it's painted on tan paper. So you see all those browns and tans. A lot of that is the paper itself. Here, for instance, clearly. And when you're looking at it, you'll be able to sort of see where it's not even covered with paint, and other places where he's painted over it, still retaining some of the color of the paper. So it was a careful choice. And this is near 29 inches wide. It's a big, highly finished painting. When Hayden, writing about the expedition, to which, by the way, Moran was a last-minute addition, another painter begged off, and Moran was, who was known by the railroad people, was added to it. And the letter introducing him said, he's a wonderful man, he's an excellent painter, and he'll be hardly any trouble at all. They didn't say that he'd never ridden a horse before. They didn't say that he was a very small man, but nonetheless, he survived that and a lot more besides. Hayden wrote about this, about suddenly seeing this. Before us arose a high white mountain looking precisely like a frozen cascade. It is formed by the calcareous sediment of the hot springs precipitated from the water as it flows down the steep declivities of the mountainside. The deposit is as white as snow, except when tinged here and there with iron or sulfur. Small streams flow in channels lined with oxide of iron, colored with the most delicate tints of red. And Moran, writing to Hayden in November of that year, said, I lately finished a very large drawing. He called these watercolors drawings. A very large drawing of the hot springs, 20 by 30 inches, which will be exhibited in New York in a couple of weeks. So he meant this as an exhibition piece, and so did he with the others, but the others were smaller. The others were sold quite quickly, by the way, to a London museum person who had opened a museum which had as its main exhibit studies of Native American Indians. And so he bought a whole set of nearly 24, all of them today in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they were eventually acquired by the Gilcrease Institute there. This one, the sort of large showpiece, is the exception to that. He wrote that he had finished this and it would be exhibited. That was November. In January 73, he wrote, I shall send down the large watercolor drawing of the springs next week to Barlow on Pennsylvania Avenue for exhibition for a week or two. It will attract attention, I think. And indeed, in the Washington Evening Star of March 15th, the critic wrote that the most notable things to be seen there just now at Barlow's are Moran's striking watercolor drawings of the hot springs on Gardner's River, so surprising and peculiar as to attract constant attention without the aid of newspaper notice. Better and better. Mary Cassatt was born in 1844, so that puts her on the next step up. And as you know, she became an expatriate for almost all of her professional life, working in and near Paris and producing the work that we all know so well. Her family moved there with her from Philadelphia. Her father, her mother, her brother, the brother's children, and those are the children she painted so wonderfully, by the way. She painted her mother, too, her mother, Catherine. Her mother, Catherine, was fluent in French, so she had no trouble reading Le Figaro here. This painting was painted in 1877-78, and it would have been in one of the Impressionist exhibitions, but the exhibition that year was delayed, and so she sent it to New York to be exhibited, and that is how it came to these shores. It is one of the most, I won't give it words, I just will look at it with you. First of all, if you were to see this in exhibition, as you will, but imagine when it was newly painted, and it was in an exhibition. It did not say Portrait of My Mother, did not say Catherine Cassatt, did not. It said Reading Le Figaro, which immediately puts it in a different category. It's not a portrait, not to the viewer in the exhibition. It is more a genre painting, in a sense, an interior painting, a comfortable interior painting with a very intelligent woman reading with great care a newspaper which was famous not only for its political news, but for its cultural news as well. And she is reading it with great attentiveness, an attentiveness that somehow keys the whole canvas. Her face is the most clearly detailed and most naturalistic, for want of a better word, realistic, painted. In other words, the brushwork that you see elsewhere, including on her hand or hands, is very free, not on the face. The face is painted with much more blended tones. There are points on the highlight on the cheekbone, for instance, where the brush becomes a little more active, but this is a matter of great description of a woman that she loved and admired, and she catches this act of reading and of concentration. Everything about it, from her ear to the lorgnette, are just extraordinary. She sits in this wonderfully patterned chair. Now, this is one of those patterns that never repeats, right? It's generally, yes, floral, yeah, sort of, leaves and pink, but nothing really repeats anywhere in it. She's freely inventing it as she goes along, even though it must, I assume, that there was a chair, a patterned chair there, but she's not bound by it in any way. It is a beautiful surround to the whiteness of that dress. That white dress, which, by the way, is full of blues and grays and all sorts of things, which is an impressionist way of looking at white, or at light, which white also is, at the color that we see reflected in the shadows. But she's painting freely, a painting in some ways worthy of Manet, though it doesn't really look like a Manet. That dress flows out and fills the lower part of the painting. And indeed, all of that, the whiteness of the figure without the head, takes up very close to half the canvas. I mean, it's a big amount of that area. And then she sits there and is set off in a way by the colors of the chair. I like this particularly on the right. It's the end of the right arm. And she just throws in those, she needs those 3 red strokes of paint there. She needs them to balance what's gone on over here. And it's just perfect. It's just absolutely, just imagine them not there. Or imagine if they were just green, not red. She knows exactly, this is Mary Cassatt at her most marvelously accomplished. What a weak word. The paper's fold fascinates me a great deal because it's folded here, but this is the top of it. Here's the masthead, and so this has got to be the top of it overlying lower part of the paper, so it's sort of folded in thirds in a way, but this is a very, very free and original passage through here. All of this, in fact, is quite fascinating, just the structure of the paper itself and the folds. and the outlines of it. And then we get, well, I should show you that too. Just look at the color, the lining of her dress. Then we get to the background, which on the one hand is wall on the right, a wall which seems to be a little unkempt. The painter didn't finish. She did, though. She put all the colors she needed and the patches she wanted and the direction she wanted here. This is all Mary Cassatt making a painting and using this space in the way that she needs it. Then the mirror, and anyone who has looked at paintings that have mirrors in them, I think is a little confounded most of the time, because a mirror instantly introduces another space that you don't otherwise see, and it introduces at a different angle in the painting than you're used to seeing it in. If she is sitting in front of her mother at an easel, because we get a straight-on view of her mother, she could be standing, but straight on. But is that reflection of the newspaper really possible? It probably is, but it doesn't need to be, because Mary Cassatt could very easily invent there to make that whole reflection of the newspaper more prominent, more expressive, but there's no way we'll ever know. I mean, none of us is going to ever be able to set up the situation and test it. Can't be done. And so you end up with this strange, large reflection. And one of the best parts of it, of course, is that her hand finally escapes. There it is. She has a left hand here, and she has 3 right fingers here. There is the rest of it from the back. And perfectly from the back, because you see where the three fingers bend around the front of the paper here. And what's left is the forefinger and the thumb to control the upper part of the paper. And then painting the rest of this, using that sort of ochreish tone that she uses out here as well, but used in small strokes, almost a construction up here. It has a great deal of form to it. I meant to go, I was upstairs a little while ago and I didn't stare at this. I want to find out just what that looks like, because I know, and you know, that when you're looking at a painting and looking at a reproduction of it, you're not seeing the same thing. Things that strike you in a reproduction may look quite different and be interpreted differently when you see it in the painting, but I'll take another look. This is one of the great Cassatts. I don't think there's any doubt about it. John Singer Sargent, another American expatriate, but different than Cassatt because she was born in Philadelphia, studied in Philadelphia, had her study behind her before she went abroad. She was a formed artist, in a sense, when she met Degas, for instance, and other impressionist painters. But she was her own woman. Anyone who knows anything about Cassatt, who has ever read her words, knows that she knew who she was, when she knew her mind. Very few women of that era would have spent months in Spain touring about alone, and she did. And it's how she discovered El Greco's eventually. You can tell I want to let it go, can't you? There's the Sargent. Now, Sargent was born in Florence, and he died in London. You don't get more expatriate than that, except that he had time in America because he got commissions in America. And in particular, at the end of his life, he was working on commissions in Boston for the public library, for instance, and for the what was the other? Anyway, he was working on large, the museum, of course, large murals that he was painting at the time of his death. He had just basically completed them. This is Sargent in the way that I imagine you would have seen him most every day when he was painting. He prepared every painting with great care. You look at this sketch, and you see how fast it seems to be. It's wonderful. He's caught everything. The attitude of this Spanish dancer, and it is just called Spanish Gypsy Dancer, 1879. The attitude of her head, the toothpaste ad of her teeth, the raised knuckle of her right hand in the background, okay, just even seen at this angle. You can see it raised over the back of her hand. The left hand, the bracelet, looks like a little serpent bracelet or something around her left wrist. And then this paint dripping shawl. It looks like nothing so much as wet paint dripping down. It's not really descriptive of material of a shawl, right here. It's going to have to send this to the cleaners. This he's drawn with great care. You can see that it's almost silhouetted here. And then with white, some black, but mainly with whites, he creates all these folds. And he does it, I'm sure, pretty rapidly. But this is one of dozens of such sketches that he would have made. This was a painting, a study for a painting that was forming in his mind because he had a commission. And the commission was from Mrs. Isabella Stewart Gardner, and the painting is still there, El Jaleo, a painting of a dancer and musicians in the background, life-size, virtually, figures. This is one of the very first ideas, and it's entirely different. It's not in darkness. Those of you who can picture up call up the other one. I wasn't going to bring in big picture to put beside this. Makes no sense. This is in white, that's in dark. This uses red, that does away with red in the final painting, but there's an intermediate step too, and when you're upstairs and have done looking at these paintings and looking at this, or you just want to take a break after looking at this, walk down the east wing halfway, the east corridor, and there's a big black gallery off to your left, and there you will see a life-size dancer, which sprung from this, but who is now turned the other way, who's dressed in black and white, but the pinky's still up, and the bracelet's still there. The whole idea has been altered utterly by color, by scale, monumental really, and then that's not even the end, because that then, a perfectly self-sufficient painting, which is here on an anonymous loan, that painting then was, as it were, inserted into El Jaleo, the painting for Mrs. Gardner. Many of you know, I hate to mention the Corcoran, but yeah, right. But many of you know their wonderful Sargent of the oyster gatherers at Cancale. The number of life-size studies he did for those smallish figures is incredible. He works, and his whole method was to do studies, more studies at different scales, This was not, for all the spontaneity that you see in his brushwork, all of the excitement of his painting, this was not somebody who just sat down and did something without thinking it through and working it through first. This is a wonderful little touchstone for that moment in Sargent's career. This is 11 inches high. And this is Sargent. And it's a study too, although not specifically for another painting, but it's come with the come down with the title Garden Study with Lucia and Kate Millett. Frank Millett was a fellow painter and a very, very significant person. Won't go into that, but his daughters here have posed for him. Or is it the older daughter and the younger daughter? Yes, I think so. She looks like she could be Mrs. Millett, but not, I think. In any event, this painting, which is about 36 inches, 24 by 36, is clearly spontaneous. There are all kinds of things which are, quote, unfinished and make it so exciting. Those floating flowers on the left. He actually uses them in finished paintings, even though this is an unsigned work. He actually uses that kind of floating, unattached flowers in finished paintings, so it's not a surprise in that sense. It's a wonderful composition, and it goes between being a very carefully controlled composition with the verticals of the girls and the verticals of the plants and even just lines. I mean, how more can I describe that? They're just lines. Nothing has been painted in at that point. The softness of the brushwork, the flashiness of the brushwork. This is a painting which is mainly about white and green, and so the pinks really make a point when they appear here. But that soft brushwork through there had a great deal of influence on artists who met Sargent at about this time. They are close to Impressionism. Sargent became a close friend of Monet. And in fact, there is a painting by Sargent of Monet painting when they were painting together. So they became really good friends, and so there's a closeness there. And Sargent was enough of his own man to know what to learn, what to borrow, and make his own. And Monet admired Sargent's work apparently quite a lot. Well, a very young painter in Boston who had gone abroad to study art. His name was Dennis Miller Bunker. He'd gone abroad to France, and he had studied well, but with mostly conservative painters, the most famous of them being Léon Gérôme, who was also Thomas Eakins' teacher for 5 years. So not a name to throw out of court, but nonetheless an academic painter by some description or other. Before returning to Boston, he went to England, and he went to a small village where, and I don't know that he knew this in advance, but Sargent had a studio there as well. And that's where he met Sargent at a moment when Sargent was experimenting with Impressionist ideas. I'll just put that with a small I and quotation marks around it. Dennis Miller Bunker came back, and in Medfield, which was near his Boston home, he painted the marshes there. And it's pretty obvious what the influence of Sargent had meant to him. It had changed. I haven't shown you on any other Bunker, of course, but he had done portraits, very fine ones, and still lifes, but everything had been much more controlled, and the color had been much more muted, and now his palette expands, and his brush just, you know that he suddenly is feeling that, oh, I think I can paint a stroke that long. He really feels his way into these grasses. The blue of the reflected sky in this little pool in the foreground is startling every time you see it, every time you see the painting. You look up at the sky itself and it doesn't seem that blue, but down here he's intensified it to the deepest blue that he can imagine. This painting was painted in 1890, and 2 months later, 6 months later, I think 2 months later, he died of heart failure at the age of 29. This was somebody, you can see enough of his work to know what the talent was and how great it really was, and then you think, well, the rest was lost. George Lukes. Those of you who know George Lukes, L-U-K-S, know George Lukes' paintings. Depends on how you met George Lukes, what you think of in your mind. There's a great painter, life-size painter of a coal miner. He came from the coal country in Pennsylvania. Huge, dark thing. That's one George Lukes, and then there are about 5 others. He was a man of many moods, but constant security in himself. He said there, I always use this quote, he said, there are only 2 painters, in the world, Frans Hals and little old George Lukes. Okay. That's one way to acknowledge your master, This painting was painted in 1912. By the way, when he painted this, he was about to get completely involved, or maybe already had, with the Armory Show. He was one of the most important of the organizers of the Armory Show. And he had moved from Lower Manhattan out to High Bridge, which crossed the Harlem River, and was able to buy a home there. He was married happily, and he was at a good moment in his life. And what does he choose to paint? Nursemaids. And there are lots of them that he painted. I say lots, I never counted them, but you see a lot of them. And they're in High Bridge Park. They are always gathered together in small groups. About the most I've ever seen is a painting that he did during the war of women knitting for the troops. And there they have half dozen of them perhaps. But here it's just two, with two children and an infant, two infants, two children, two infants. And within this very, very, I don't know, cozy little painting, he manages to pull us in. One of the devices is the little child looking straight out at us. We tend to go right to that non-face face. He doesn't give him any features, really. And then the nursemaid to our right leans in, and that lean makes us visually lean in together with it. These are modest paintings, but I wouldn't want to leave it at that, because they're highly accomplished, modest paintings. There is much in Luke's art that is comforting, and not at all either aggressively modernist or physically imposing. The way they've hung these, I'm going to show this. I wanted to show it without the frame, so it would be a larger image, but I want to show it to you with the frame that it's in, because and I'm not doing this with other ones just to keep the image large, but this frame, which is very nice and very appropriate in its way for this painting, also seems to emphasize that it's small. We sense that, even in a reproduction. And its size actually is 16 by 20 inches. And it's an oil on canvas and framed in this quite fine frame. Well, what they've done is very beautiful in hanging three what I will call park scenes which are, in other words, urban landscapes, if you will. And they're left to right in, these paintings are all about the same date, but the first two are 1912, and they make a beautiful series of three. First this, and with the frame, and then this. William Glackens. The Glackens is about 30 inches wide, so it's about twice the size, or close to it, of area, I suppose, of the canvas. And it's a more open painting than the Luke's was. The Luke's closes, pulls in on itself, cuddles on itself. This one opens up to both sides. There's people walking through and walking out, and there are things on the other side, including an automobile leaving, and people hurling along. It has a helpful title, which we probably could figure out for ourselves. The first part of it is March Day, and I think that is looking at the trees tells you winter is still around. And what we wouldn't know necessarily is that it's Washington Square. It's March Day, Washington Square in New York. And it's, as I say, 30 inches wide. Now, when you look at this painting, you see that the rain has probably just stopped, because these gentlemen in the foreground here have furled umbrellas, but they're quite clearly shown. People still scurrying along, and the streets are clearly wet here. A marvelous variation of these figures, each a different type, different age, and so forth. And a couple, an immigrant wife and an infant and a boy beside her, I'm assuming a boy, but a child walking beside her in a red shirt, and leaving the painting, as it were, on the other side. So, like many of these paintings, and I've said nothing about it, but the New York painters who formed the Group of the Eight, for instance, were journalists, most of them at the beginning, and many of them did satirical cartoons and so forth, a lot of things. Some of them, during the second decade of the 20th century, worked for the Masses, which was the great socialist magazine of its day, great socialist publication. And one was an art director, and another one was contributing most of the drawings and so forth. When you look at this, now that I've told you it's Washington Square, you may remember I have too little experience of Washington Square. I never go down to Washington Square, and so I don't have experience of it in different weather, and certainly I didn't have any experience of it in 1912, when the brick houses which surrounded the square were prominent, and when none of them had been replaced by any intruders. This became a 30-year battle during the reign of Robert Moses in New York City to preserve Washington Square Park. But now that you know that it's Washington Square Park, you can probably know what's over here. Because at first you just see these two yellow pylons. They can only be Memorial Arch, which was constructed there first by a private individual living, had some money, I think, or maybe he collected it from friends. Now that I remember my history, collected money and built a temporary arch across Fifth Avenue at the square to honor the centennial of George Washington's inauguration as president. And it was made of plaster and wood originally. Now, it was there in that form. I'm giving you this for a reason. It was there in that form until 1892, and it was so popular then that a permanent marble arch was designed by Stanford White and was built in the same spot. Now, the thing that is peculiar about this to me, about the arch, and I'll just throw it out now and then come back to it, is the yellowness. In my experience down there, it looks like marble, and whitish marble sometimes, and less so other times, but I've never seen it yellowish. So I started to figure out if, my eyes were going, or what I had missed. Nobody mentioned it. The other thing about it is that there's something else hard to talk about over there. What's this green construction? Some of you may have figured it out already. It took me a while in front of the painting, but it is, it's a bus. And I found another painting by William Glackens, who, by the way, was born in 1870. See, we're moving right along. Glackens did another painting just the 2 years before called Descending from the Bus. Very helpful of him, and I'm showing you a detail. I just wanted to concentrate on that. There's the bus and the back steps, which you entered and exited by, and 4 ladies are exiting there. There are gentlemen seated on the bus, and a conductor, I think, is standing, aiding them down. And there's the arch, yellower than ever, on there. And you will see the same thing in other paintings of the period. Did they paint it? No, apparently not. As far as I can tell, it's something that if we were around after a storm or after a heavy rain, and with the right light on it, I suppose preferably the setting sun, we might see, because the marble that they chose is called Tuckahoe. Tuckahoe marble, it was a very, very important quarry. I know nothing of these things, but it was a very important quarry that sent marble all over the world. And it was another name for Westchester marble. Well, it was, the marble had a very brilliant white color some of the time, brilliant white in the marble, but it also had amounts of iron-bearing minerals in it, so that when it got wet, the oxidation caused the marble to turn orange-brown. And so when it's exposed to the weather, well, it is all the time, but I've still not seen that. But there's the footnote that I was looking for. Back to the Lukes, because I've interrupted my own sequence across the wall, or their sequence across the wall, so I put the Luke. Oh, there it is in the sunset one day. So you do see occasional photographs. If you scan around the internet, you find occasional photographs showing it a kind of mustard yellow here, I would say. Back to Luke's in its frame, and then from the Luke's to the Glackens. And then finally from the Glackens to a painting a little wider than the Glackens, and quite different, but another park scene, but just called In the Park. It's generic. and it's by, and many of you would recognize the style, it's by Maurice Prendergast. Prendergast was born in 1858. He's an older artist than Glackens and an older artist than Lukes. And a man who is generally in the history books called one of the most important early modernists in America, and I've never been able to follow that train of thought very far. He was, after all, the oldest of this group, and you've gone through the Lukes with its warmth, as it were, cold warmth, to the wonderful Glackens with its freedom. And now you've gone to a frieze-like situation in which everything is bound by the trees. The figures are immobile. They're all women except the one standing man with the black coat, I take it. They are all faceless. This is not just a few artists who do this, but many artists who are painting multi-figures seem to turn to this just mask-like. But I don't think he's really interested in the figures as such, certainly not as personalities. He's interested in them as where they are in the place on the canvas, usually arranged in a row. There's not a lot of movement into the background, and their colors, and he works a lot at that. And his color is laid down with great assertiveness. Wouldn't you say that was right? Great assertiveness. He lays it on thickly. This is odd because when he paints in watercolor, which he did all of his life, his watercolors are very fluid, as you would expect, as you would hope. They're very free. They're much different, not in composition, but in the sense of light and movement of air around them. His large paintings of park scenes tend to be much more formal. They relate in a sense, because people always cite post-impressionism, and I think you can find some examples. You can look at Seurat. But Seurat's paint is not laid on like this, even though he is very interested in a kind of static composition. So this is laid out with these trees behind the figures and interspersed sometimes, then the river and the far bank and the sky, everything in pure horizontal bands moving across the back. Prendergast painted this probably about 1920, and that really is the sort of latest painting in the group. John Sloan of the John Sloan of all of this group is probably the one most associated with the paintings of Lower New York in most people's minds. And I think it's because he also was a draftsman who did a lot of wonderful lithographs and other prints, which dealt with darkness, which dealt with poverty, another kind of darkness. He was one of the most active figures with the publication of the masses. He was a person who was, to put it mildly, very socially conscious in these early years in New York City. And if you look at paintings of the same period by Whistler, for instance, in London, painting the same kinds of areas frequently, that is to say, not necessarily wealthy areas, but it's not. London's an old city, so you don't get that feeling. And Whistler also painted in Venice, and Venice is an older city. So the darkness has a different connotation. But in New York, darkness had a street connotation to it. And as this painting is extremely attractive and extremely unusual because of the flowers. He had worked all day painting on another work, another painting, a fountain painting outdoors. And as he was taking a break, he looked out the window and saw the flower shop across the street and then wrote down in his journal that he had an idea for a painting, and he describes it quite clearly. So he didn't see this happen precisely. He saw the place and the light, and he could put the people in as he needed to. They were not posing for him. They're people that he arranged here, and there are a number of them. You almost would miss the gentleman who is leaving over here. He's got an umbrella, and he's on his way out. And here, a woman who her interest is toward the flowers, I think, and I love the way the light picks the side of her face and leads our gaze into the flowers, where the couple, with one umbrella between them, I believe, where the couple are looking at choosing the lilies. The reason the shop is open, it was Easter night. Easter Eve is the title of the painting, and it's painted in 1907. So the shop stayed open late to sell the Easter lilies. And so he gives him the chance to take something modern, electric light, indoors, and the indoor light spills out over the flowers, and there's a cafe next door. I haven't figured out the relationship of this door to the rest. I'll work on it someday, but it's a pictorially very nice addition at that point. When 6 of the people in this show were a member of the group called the 8. Only Robert Henry is not among these, and also Arthur Davies, who never looked like he belonged with them anyway. But the other 6 are among these, and Sloan is the one we associate strongly with the 8. The 8 met, just to remind you, the 8 met once, exhibited together once, in 1908 at the Macbeth Gallery, 8. And that's all. They knew each other, and they never showed together again. And it remains an oddity of history, because of art history, because it's a turning point in American art. In a sense, it attracted so much attention. Let me turn from this to the other Sloan. This is a savings bank. Now, when you said savings bank, of course, you meant for the working class. And you know how many savings banks there were. And in fact, one of the fun thing, I'd never done it in New York, but in Philadelphia, a whole group of savings banks downtown, still standing, all with grand names, but all, penny bank. They were all large banks built on small depositors. And in this case, you see what a grand building it's in. I wonder if it still stands. It's not identified in anything I've found, but it's a wonderful dome, and for light from that, and then very high windows. And then the wooden office booths here, they're the tellers are, where you can see 2 distinct tellers and hint at others. And the room is divided by this bench, which I like the way he puts it at this diagonal angle. The men sat to the right, the women to the left. It was a 19th century bank, and the habit had changed. There was no rule to divide them anymore, but people still sat that way. They hadn't broken the rule. There is a little peeking going on here. But he's really the only one. He looks over the, and his face is detailed so that you catch it. He is looking over at someone of the ladies on the other side. But there are other darker things here. A man who is bent over here filling out forms, for instance. And there is a sense here of the Lower East Side, I think, that kind of setting in the early part of the century. Sloan, Ernest Lawson, whom I know is never as well known as he ought to be, but here is a grand, memorable Ernest Lawson. He's one of the 8 as well. He was born in 1873, and he lived till 1939. This is called Excursion Boat, and it's the only painting of this subject or type of it by him of which I'm aware. It was painted about 1910. It's a big painting, about 30 inches wide. It's a wonderful painting because it's full of action. The boat is letting its passengers off, and then will return to another dock somewhere, do the same passage again. But these people are streaming toward us, and so is the paint. All this patches of paint here boardwalk leading out to the ship. I love these as well. The logs. What's the word I'm looking for? Pilings. Thank you very much. Pilings there and also over here, and he makes it an integral part of the painted composition, and the pilings almost become part of the boat as it nestles up against them. There's nothing really to identify it, nothing can be read here, and it just sort of stands alone in his work. Remember one thing always about Lawson is that he has a great deal of variety. His paintings are generally, I think, of the very highest quality. The Phillips owns a dozen or so Lawson, so there's usually always something up to enjoy. And he's a wonderful, wonderful painter who probably, among this group of Americans at this time, understood the paintings of Cézanne better than anyone else. And I think if you really look at this hard and the way brushstrokes are used to construct, even in this scene of pleasure and water, a scene that is very unlike any Cézanne, but I think the lesson has been well learned. Not too much more here, so I will move along, but they're good. One of them is by Everett Shinn. Like many of these painters, for instance, Sloan was another, Henry another. A lot of them came from Philadelphia or worked in for Philadelphia newspapers in the press and so forth. So they were journalists, illustrators for newspapers. Shinn did perhaps more of that than some. Shinn became fascinated, however, with subjects that seemed rather French. The theater, for instance. I mean, the theater in New York was a big thing already, but he really became attached to it as a subject in the way that you associate with Degas in France and with Toulouse-Lautrec. And here, there aren't too many besides Shinn who get into the act, as it were. We're backstage, and I read that, in fact, Shinn often was allowed to stand backstage to watch performances. In this case, it's a performance of a trapeze artist here, has a man on her shoulders and a girl hanging from his shoulders who is trying, I think, to reach rather than letting go of the bar back here. If she lets go, it's all over here, so I think he's trying to reach that. But this is, and here are the faces. Not one of them more than a bit of white. Boom, boom. Looking up against you can see the footlight light here. They look to me like some giant insect flying in, a great colorful, uncategorized creation. I'm just going to throw this out and let people who know New York help me out sometime. It's called Trapeze Winter Garden. And as far as I can tell, in 1903, there was no winter garden. There was an earlier winter garden that burned in 1869, and there was a later one which has been owned by the Schubert Foundation or Schubert Theaters since 1911 or 12. It's their oldest building. And I can't find anything in between. And so I don't know where the title originated. It's not, help. I ask for help. Next to it, the museum has hung their own Shinn. I should probably say one of their own Shinns. This one is a larger painting by half. It's called the White Ballet. It's about 36 inches wide, whereas the Shinn we just looked at is about 23. The White Ballet is very interesting to contrast with it because now we're in the audience, albeit in a box close to the stage, but we're part of the audience looking over the shoulder of a woman, man, another woman, and by the way, he's smoking, but then people did in theaters, and his face is lit up by the lights from below. And then there's the corps de ballet and a prima ballerina all there filling up the whole stage. It's called the White Ballet. I'm not a balletman, so I didn't know what the White Ballet meant. There were three ballets, there are three ballets known as the White Ballets. One is Swan Lake, one is Giselle, and one is La Bayadère. I think just from the storylines, this is probably Giselle, but I don't know Giselle, so I'm sort of guessing from the storyline, but I'm pretty sure it's not Swan Lake. These are, all three of them tell the same kind of story, the same storyline of ethereal maidens who float in white costumes suspended somewhere between heaven and earth. And now I know what the title relates to. I'll back up to this because it's very, very special painting by Shinn, very special, daring in a way. And finally, I show you George Bellows, of which there are three. And they are paintings to treasure, and I know they are. They're paintings to hold in your mind's eye as best you can. Not an easy job in many cases. This painting, if you were to look at it for 10 minutes and go away and describe it to somebody, you might be, and write a description down, you might be awfully surprised when you compared it with what you thought you remembered. It's not easy. It's a tough picture. Just as a picture, the whole middle of the picture, more than the middle, half of the picture, but swept across the middle, is brown, earth, dirt. The side of a bank of a river looks more like an excavation, but surely it's a river bank. The title of this very famous painting, because it's his first masterpiece, is River Rats, and that's the kids below who are, and these were kids who were free every day because their parents were working 6 days a week, 15-hour shifts or whatever, and the mothers in the garment district and other places. So the kids were free, and some of the kids, many of them, were homeless. There were an immense number of homeless children running about in gangs frequently in New York City. So here they are down on, I should think, the East River, and at the bottom of this immense piece of abstract painting, right? I mean, the brush is as free as anything you want. It describes it, sure, but take away the top and the bottom, enlarge it to abstract expressionist size. Yeah, oh, yes, oh. It's got a lot going on in it that I've never deciphered. The building on the right must be a dock building because there is a rudimentary dock there that the kids on the right are sitting on or being pulled up onto. He just does these kids with a stroke like this. They're not described really, and yet people use descriptive adjectives about them. They talk of them as skinny, right? Brushstroke will do that just fine. It's and they're anonymous, and they're in a dangerous place, we would say today. How did anyone ever grow up? There is something else in this painting, just in the way of, and I'd like your thoughts on it if you have any. When I started looking at this, it occurred to me that this must be a rudimentary cutting as a roadway down to the dock area when it's needed, and then up to somewhere we don't see. I also don't know what that building, which is so clearly important, at least as a white backdrop in the back is. This painting is mesmerizing, and I think you do want to give it as much time as you can. 1906, and then very different, and yet 1908, 2 years later. Pretty large painting, about 28 inches, but it's abstract too. Franz Klein would have loved it. It's just extraordinary. This great L going across, the supports for it, the cylindrical sewer or water pipes, which are here, horses, draft horses, but we don't, with a boy driving the two of them, but we don't know what they're pulling. There's a lot we don't know. There's more we don't know than we do know. There are two figures here, whether they're also mounted or on some machinery or whatever, we don't know. There is smoke or steam, I don't know. But I think, the L used at its height, the L was used at its height, right? The L used small locomotives, kind of miniature locomotives, so there was smoke involved. Originally they were pulled by by pulleys around from a central power station, but then they had their own little engines. But that doesn't look like train smoke to me. Actually, it looks like a wonderful bit of painting. White and blue. This is what Manhattan, what downtown, where this construction was going on everywhere, and this is what it must have looked like, because the pollution to the air must have been unbelievable, and it would block out the daylight, essentially, which makes you wonder how daylight broke through over here. Is that just courtesy of the artist? I looked at the painting an hour ago or so, and when I was looking at it again, it's not as bright in the painting as it is in the slide. This makes it more intense. But it's still bright, and it still gives the feeling of a shaft of sunlight. But for heaven's sakes, from where? And is this merely a shadow? I think so, but I can't make them work together. 4 women, perhaps 5 when you look at it really closely, but let's say 4 women emerging from this jumble. This has been interpreted as snow, and that may well be the case, but it is such a dense, exciting in a way, but I always get a certain, this is probably me speaking, I get a certain sense of threat in parts of this painting, because I guess because it's so unexplained, so much of it remains unexplained. I don't understand it, in other words. It's a powerful, powerful image, just there. This is an artist who had many, many hats. He would have been a member of the 8, but he got there a year too late. He became friends of all of them, but he wasn't a member of that group. He is the painter who reminds us, when he paints the sea, most of Winslow Homer, I think, very much so. But he tries many things, many things. He tried some wartime pictures, World War I, and they were propaganda pictures, his own propaganda, aimed at war atrocities. And when another painter said that he really shouldn't paint those paintings because he hadn't been there, and he said, really? He said, I wasn't aware that Leonardo had a ticket to the Last Supper. Yes. One good comeback is worth. And Bellows was an athlete from his childhood, from his youth. He's from Columbus, Ohio, and grew up in Columbus, went to Ohio State and played basketball and played baseball. Was so good at baseball that he was approached by pro and semi-pro baseball teams to put him under contract, but he already knew he wanted to be a painter, and so he went to New York and learned to paint. But athletics were part of his subjects, and you all know his boxing pictures, of which the National Gallery has 2 examples, one very great one. And those paintings, the boxing paintings, have a strong social edge to them. They're about race in America and in American sport as well. They are paintings with a lot of savagery in them, in the audience, not just in the ring. They're extraordinary. And then, among other things, he painted tennis matches, which couldn't be more different it could not be. This is the last painting by date in the show, together with the Prendergast. It's called The Tournament, Tennis at Newport, painted in 1919. Bellows and his wife were summered nearby all the time, but he spent much of the summer of 1919 at Newport, Rhode Island, near where they lived. And because he was painting, I just put this in parenthetically, he was painting a portrait of Maud Dale, the wife of Chester Dale, National Gallery. The portrait of Chester and Maud Dale by Bellows, which he was painting that summer, are in the National Gallery as well, so you can enjoy them there. But this scene at Newport was there. He was playing tennis, but now he didn't play baseball anymore, though he did while he was painting as a younger man to help support himself in New York. But he now was, when he did turn to athletics, it was tennis, and he decided to paint tennis matches at Newport. The Newport Casino had been designed by Charles McKim and Stanford White, opened in 1881. It was a members' club, a social club. It held concerts and tea parties and theatrical events, and it staged the annual U.S. Open, the Lawn Tennis Association Championships is what I should say, not the Open as we know it, for 30 years. And Bellows went to see, Bill Tilden was playing, he went to see this summer in 1919 and to paint. And he did 4 paintings at Newport of tennis, and they're all different, and 2 of them are unfinished. One of them's at the National Gallery. This one is in the Lincoln collection. He gets to a point, and then he stops and tries another one. It's very curious. There's a lot that's very finished here. The hardest thing was perspective. He's got tennis going one way and your eye going another, so it was very tricky to do all of this. But this is the figure that the most active figure in the painting. He would have had his his racket here had Bellows finished the painting, but this is just an outline of where the racket was, and he's got a finished hat, but no racket yet. And portions here, you see, of the skirts over here, and even here, have not been completed. The series gave him some trouble. Doesn't matter. The paintings are all really quite wonderful in their freedom. It's a different class here. We're talking social class. We're talking about a society that likes to be seen, and they're showing off there. And so they're up here and they're down here, crowding the court, much too close to the court, I think, to have these folks down here. Wonderful what he does with heads. He turns hers, here she is, right, and turns her head completely at right angles, so she's just red hair and staring. He has no face. He has no face. None of them have any features, again, not just because he didn't finish it. I mean, this was not the reason at all. There is, if you look at the man closest to the net waiting to return, there is, I don't know whether you can see it in this reproduction, but you go up to him, you'll see a little black eye and a wonderful smile. And it's a cartoon figure, and it's the kind of thing that he would have done in many of the cartoon illustrations that he had done younger. And I think I've seen it in other of his paintings as well. I also like this figure sitting sort of cross-legged out here on the edge of this, and this is all ivy covered, apparently. Well, you know, this is an entirely different register, as it were, for him to play his music in. It's quite extraordinary for Bellows to turn to these. Unhappily, he died in 1924, still in his 40s, early 40s, 44, I think. And so he would have gone further. And if you saw the great Bellows show at the National Gallery, you know what he did in the time he had. An awful lot of wonderful work. This, by the way, is a doubles match, if I didn't mention it, because you might not notice it for all the crowd. There's the other one. Okay, and that's why he's so close to the net over here. And if you look through the judge's stand, I'm pretty sure that's his partner back here, in the same position as this fellow. But you know, this is a kind of painting you can go hunting for little figures. I want to say, just in letting you go tonight, that seeing this exhibition, I think, is a great privilege. Seeing the Bellows, seeing the Sloans, seeing the Cassatt, is an exquisite privilege, and you've only got 2 months to do it. So some of these paintings you could spend hours with. The Lankens, Thelma and Melvin Lincoln, are to be thanked for their generosity in this show, and so I say to them, game, set, and match. Thank you. I know I've run you probably past the stage of questions and answers, but there are 2 microphones, and anyone who wants to take one, please do. Yes.
So my question is about Martin Johnson Head and his the orchid and hummingbird paintings.
Yes.
And what has always struck me about them, but I don't have any formal art training, so I have trouble articulating it, is what I see as the balance between the shapes of the orchids and how the hummingbirds' shapes are positioned.
Yes.
Could you just comment on that so I can hear the language from someone?
Oh, dear. No. Let me think about that. I mean, they do. He definitely makes them complement one another, but why wouldn't he? He's making congruent forms, congruent shapes. He's set something up very difficult for himself to do what is, in a sense, still life painting in the open air, in a setting which isn't on a tabletop and isn't in the usual kind of setting. So he's got to do a lot of things to construct that. He had a lot of time to do it because he wasn't painting from life. He had made his studies in the usual, I suppose, ornithological way, but he wasn't painting that way. He was painting from things he'd already painted and constructing. So there must have been a lot of fitting together. But no, I can't say anything sensible about that, I don't think.
Well, the word congruent, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Well, you know, I also, when we were looking at the white ballet, one main shape in that painting of the arms up, all of the ballerinas have their arms up, so does the prima donna. And it's just the whole thing, you go through the painting, and these are all just cusp shapes that go through, and in a way are the main compositional idea after this thrust into space. That's by the way. No one else at a mic? Sir? Yes, sir.
Bill, nice job, by the way. What is a masterwork?
Well, I could do one of two things. I could send you to, three things. I could send you to the publicity department. I could send you to curatorial. We could see if they had a board meeting about it. Aside from that, if you look at them, not all will become equally, in your eyes, a masterwork. There just isn't any question about that. That's not going to be. It's a judgment, it's a call, it's a way of saying, these are wonderful things. And masterwork, masterpiece, great. Lord, I use so many superlatives when I'm talking about art that people's heads spin, because I'm so amazed that anyone made any of that. I'm not, seriously. Of these artists, there are some that I think are magnificent artists, some that I think are a little less magnificent artists, but painted a wonderful painting here. It's interesting to take an artist like, Everett Shinn, who, because he's predictable in a way, you get surprised, completely surprised, when you see the painting that we saw, the trapeze. It's a painting that is recognizably Shinn, but so fine, so top of the line, top of the game kind of thing. So it's a masterwork in that sense. But I hate the superlatives, but I'm the one who uses them all the time. So.
Bill, thank you so much for giving the lecture this evening. Oh, I'm sorry, we have one more question.
Sir.
Hi, I had a question about the 8. I'm wondering about, you mentioned some social commentary is sometimes an element of some of the paintings, and I'll talk about the 8 plus Bellows. Bellows especially, Sloan, people who had backgrounds in some of these, publications that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you see, and I see some of that in Glackens too.
Yes.
And some of the big Lux portraits. And I'm wondering if you see a similar trait in the paintings of Prendergast, for example?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so, and I have very complicated thoughts about Prendergast. I think because of what's been written about Prendergast doesn't agree with the way I see him. I don't mean in terms of quality necessarily. I mean in terms of how he is placed in art history, and there's been in American art history a strong attempt to make an American modernist tradition. And it's hard to do because the war kind of sweeps everything away before it ever gets off its feet. Europe somehow rebounds with a modernist tradition more strongly. We have to get all the way to mid-century after the next war, the Great War, and the other Great War. We have to get all the way to mid-century with abstract expressionism before we really develop a modernist. What it means with the others, and why I don't use it very often, is because modernism in America is by fits and starts, even after the Armory show. I mean, it's just a little here and a little there, and it means mainly, it's taken to mean European influence of European modern painters who were already accepted as modern painters, as Picasso and Matisse in their early years and so forth. But ours is very complicated. Our whole long tradition of realism enters into everything we do, even abstraction. But it certainly enters into the whole of this period that we're looking at here, because no matter how free some of the paintings are, how little they worry about the delineation of the faces of their figures and so forth, they all are in a realist tradition. And since that tradition always related to a specific American society, which was young, which was a founding society, which in the case of New York was raw, still very, very raw, when these painters were painting, if they had ignored, all of them, the city, and gone back to Jersey, they it just wouldn't have it wouldn't have been the honorable thing to do. They stayed, they painted what they could. They had an awful time selling paintings of the slums, for instance. If you look at Glackens, who is probably one of the most attractive painters, just because he picked up a bright palette early, and I think you all know one reason why was Dr. Barnes sent him to Europe to buy modern art for him, and he came back after 2 weeks with more than 30 or 40 Cézannes, Renoirs, etc. From $10,000. Actually, he asked for further advance. But this is, Glackens picked up on impressionism in a way that nobody else really did in terms of color, but it was mainly Renoir that he was picking up on. He was a great lover of Renoir. Yet Glackens was a realist. You look at his drawings, which by the way are scattered throughout the Barnes Foundation collection. His drawings are satirical, funny. They're cartoons most of the time. And they're all realist. Absolutely, they're based on a kind of common realist ground. I'm going far off the point, but
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
And thank you, Bill, for giving this wonderful lecture.
No, you're welcome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience.